Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Farmer Greg here, and welcome to the 555th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where every day we work to educate and inspire you to become part of your food revolution. If you're listening to this podcast, then you know the value of life-giving, fresh, homegrown food. The truth is, we weren't meant to eat processed foods or lifeless produce that was flown in from thousands of miles away, taking days or even weeks to reach our plates. In March, Urban Farm U hosted our first Edible Backyard Summit, a free online event designed to bring thousands of people together to learn about growing food in our yards. People loved it so much that I decided to offer it again. I've teamed up with some amazing gardening visionaries to share their knowledge this September. When you attend our free online summit, you'll get access to all 4 days of knowledge from food growing experts and have an opportunity to get your most burning garden questions answered live. Just like in March, we're going to air 4 modules of our comprehensive Growing Food the Basics course so that you can dig deeply into fundamental concepts that will set you up for success no matter where you're at in your food growing journey. I hope you'll dig in and join us for this transformative event. Plus, by attending the summit and sharing it with your friends, you will be part of the Grow Your Own Food revolution. To sign up, visit ediblebackyardsummit.com. And it would mean a lot to us if you could share the page far and wide with your friends on social media, in your garden clubs, and places we haven't even thought about. If you can't attend all of the classes live, you can still sign up. We offer replays and the ability to purchase an all-access pass that gives you lifetime access to the classes plus a package of bonuses that we've put together to say thanks and give you even more resources for creating your own edible yard. Are you ready to truly thrive with a healthy life and get connected with your food? Live a more self-reliant life and feel secure knowing that you have a food supply right in your backyard? When you attend the Edible Backyard Summit, you'll be part of a community of people from all around the world that are all on the same mission to make their backyards and patios an edible paradise. Whether you're starting your first garden or maintaining an existing one, you will come out of this summit feeling revitalized and re-inspired to make growing and eating food the celebration it should be. Sign up for free by going to ediblebackyardsummit.com, and I hope to see you there. Today on our podcast, we have someone who asks, can there be too much organic matter in our garden soil? We're talking with Mykl Nelson about healthy urban soil. Mykl grew up in a military family and has been stationed around the world. The longest he lived anywhere was 6 years in Colorado and 6 years in Oregon. His paternal grandparents were commodity farmers in Wyoming who hoped their kids would be too smart to become farmers. Of their 4 children and 9 grandchildren, Mykl is the only one in agriculture. Mykl is an instructor of urban agriculture at Oregon State University and is pursuing research into controlled environment agriculture. He has clusters of houseplants from different biomes on his windowsills, worms in the garage, and he's experimenting with insect protein production. It seems if there's a living system to be emulated, Mykl is interested. Welcome to the show today, Mykl. Are you ready to rock garden soil?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at today?
Sure. I think the most standout thing about that turned me down this path of agriculture was while I was living in Colorado, my roommate and I built a greenhouse in our backyard, about 400 square feet. And there was just this one or a span of summer days that I was able to go out with a bowl and just pick a salad straight into that bowl.
Oh, nice.
Right? That was so inspiring. That was the closest, that was the okay, I need to close this gap. I work to get money to eat. How can I tighten that up and just make it to where what I'm doing is feeding me? And that kind of set me off, made me look towards the Pacific Northwest to kind of get into a little bit more official agriculture training, I guess. I kind of had it in my mind that that's where I needed to go, and it worked out. I ended up working on a handful of small organic urban to peri-urban farms between Beaverton and Philomath, and I know so much more than I did then, and I'm really excited to kind of get back to that greenhouse in the backyard and start applying everything that I've gained in the meantime.
Nice. So before we actually get started with talking about garden soil, when I first found out about you, I saw an article talking about too much organic matter in garden soil. And my first question was, what? And so I looked you up and I found a blog post on Oregon State University's website that started with, "My name is Mykl Nelson, a world citizen intent on feeding the globe." And I have to say, I got chills. In fact, I just got chills right now when I said that. Tell me about what that's about for you.
I hope it's not being made up to be bigger than it is, but I do find it kind of the most succinct way that I can phrase my inspiration, be it to others or to myself. Like, that's what I'm trying to do. So first half, world citizen, like, I'm here, we're human, we're all in this, trying to figure it out, and feeding the globe. Like, I'm not specifically looking to produce all the food on everyone's plates, but I think there are some important things that can change, that can really increase the agency that people have to access and control their own food supply.
You're right. Like what's been going on this year.
Yeah, I mean, kind of we're getting into that, talking about the gardens. We see an uptick here. Kind of every time there's economic uncertainty, we see an associated uptick in home gardening or urban agriculture or something like that. Yeah.
I love your vision, intent on feeding the globe. In 1991, I created myself to be the person on the planet responsible for transforming our global food system. And I don't intend to do it all myself. I just am kind of one of the catalysts, and so are you. And I love that about you. Thank you.
Yeah. You've got to look for a way to over leverage yourself, like without being spread too thin, like
right.
You can only do so much. There's just the one of you, as you were saying before we started recording, there's just you can only do so much. And so you got to figure out ways to really tilt things towards the way that you want them to go.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's why the podcast and Urban Farm U for me, and for you, your studies and your teaching. And I used to teach sustainable ag at Arizona State University. And so everything that we can do to get people awake and aware, I think is one of the most important things I can do.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm kind of looking at it now as like, what's a way that I can speed people along? How can I take someone who's where I was about 7-ish years ago, whether they're picking the salad into their bowl or not, they're otherwise inspired. They want to do something, but the problem's always like, what do I do and how do I do it and all that. And like, so if I can take someone along and get them up to where I am or beyond as fast as possible, that would be, I think, a pretty effective way to start changing the globe and start feeding some more people.
Well, and I'm sure you've done that. How does it feel?
So yes, I have. At the time of this recording, I've recently finished teaching my first class. And it was pretty exciting. It was there's definitely some validation, just like, hey, I guess there's stuff that I know that people could benefit from knowing as well. So
yes,
that's nice.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then there's just in general, just kind of like you're getting some of their questions and you're guiding them along, and then you see at the end that not with everybody, but with some of them, like that they feel like they can do something now, like right. That we've gone through this plan. They're not alone. Questions can be answered. And so we start with an idea. What would you do if you were to plant in your urban area? And then we finish with, here's your plan. You just go do it. I can't do that for you. I can do all this. I can take you along a little bit for all the planning, but you got to get out there and do it. And so I'm just trying to get people to where they can go and do it.
One of the coolest things for me in teaching at Arizona State University, taught there for 5 or 6 years, was to look back on my time there, the seeds that we planted in my classes, and to see some of the content and activities that people have been up to and doing since then. And, there's a guy here in town who started a whole food composting company out of taking my classes. So it's, that's always really cool.
Oh yeah. again, a little bit self-aggrandizing, but it feels good, and I do look forward to that time. Like I said, it's a new class. I've got plans for more. More things are in the works, but for me, it's just started, and I optimistically anticipate a future where at least somebody is able to, has done something because of what happened in our class.
Yeah. Well, and you have a real limb up because your office mate is Andrew Millison, who has been doing this for decades. Both you know him because he's your office mate. I know him because he used to live here in Arizona, and we used to affiliate. He's been on the podcast. So there's a really deep bucket of where you can learn from as well.
Yeah, especially right now. I mean, I was already teaching online before anything happened this year, and especially now things are moving even harder online, and Andrew's got an extensive amount of experience there, especially being able to take this, what's traditionally thought of as like something so physical, like how can you can barely even teach it in a classroom. I need to take them outside, and we need to go do something with plants. Like how do you move something so physically rooted like that and get it into the digital environment where you can reach anybody everywhere? So I agree. I'm really glad to have his work. I'm glad to be able to just talk to him whenever. Like it's cool that he's one of the people in my life where like people know his name, and he's someone I can just send a message to. Or whatever.
Right, exactly. Boy, I hear you on that. Well, cool. Congratulations. I love the work you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah.
Cool. So let's go to our thesis question that got me interested in calling you in the first place. And that is, there can be too much organic matter in garden soil? That blows me away. How can that be?
Well, there can be too much of anything, right? Like
all right, I'll buy that.
I think moderation is kind of the name of the game. We're seeing that, like, the emerging idea in soil science right now is we're more talking about soil health. And so depending on who you say, they might use a term like a balanced soil or something to that effect. And so it's kind of like if you've heard of Liebig's leaky barrel, where it's made, a barrel's made of a bunch of slats. It can only hold as much water as the shortest slat. And so you're trying to balance this barrel or the soil with what your plant needs. And so if you have too much of something, it doesn't really help when you have too little of something else. And so I guess
here in the desert soil, we have less than 1% organic matter.
Mm-hmm.
So our fix here has always been to add lots and lots and lots of compost, add lots of woody mulch on the top, really build out the soil so it's more like a forest soil.
Mm-hmm.
And less like a compacted cliche dirt.
Yes. So I will definitely agree that we have to acknowledge, soils are diverse. And so in this case, my study took place in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. Not to disparage the farmers here or anything, but easy street. I mean, stuff just grows here.
Yeah.
It's part of why I'm here, right? Like it works. And down where you are, not even close to the same kind of soil. And so it's probably going to take longer to go too far and to over-enrich your soil than it would for here. But I do think there's something that is applicable to anyone regardless of what their native soil is. When we're seeing this popularity of building raised beds, a lot of those, I don't have the research to back this up, so this is conjecture here, but my opinion is that a lot of them are filled with more or less the same stuff. It's a lot of bagged imported media. And so the further you go to bring something in, the more homogenized it becomes, right? Like the more industrialized it is, the more of a product it becomes. And so I think a lot of raised beds are going to look very similar to other raised beds because they're being created in the same manner. Whereas the soils underneath, they got created under different conditions. Those raised beds are being created by people using bagged product.
Got it. And so imported media, imported soils, I've always been a fan of buying local soils. And it was my conjecture, is that the right word? Was my idea that soil, given that it was made locally, has local microbes, local microorganisms, local life that is going to do better here.
I'm no soil microbiologist. I don't know.
But it kind of makes sense, right?
Right? Maybe. But I'm sure, as everything else, it's going to depend, right? It's going to depend on the processing. Was it hot composted? In which case, that's a pretty strong filtering effect. That's going to kill off anything that can't take the heat. And then it's going to be recolonized by whatever is around or in it. And so, post-hot composting is probably going to be pretty similar regardless of what you started with. I don't know. It's getting kind of hazy.
It's all right. So let's jump into your study. You actually did a study. Tell me about it.
Summer of 2017, I went to 29 different garden sites run by master gardeners, certified master gardeners in the state of Oregon between Portland and Corvallis. So it was important that they were the certified master gardeners, so we have a standard starting point, right? Like they're all exposed to the same amount of training. They all have to have the same amount of hours of education per year of continuing credits. And they're all trained ostensibly with the latest knowledge from Oregon State Extension. Ultimately, I test their garden soils, and despite this training and this commonality of research, they're all just very over-enriched. This is basically the short of what I find. It's a lot of everything.
And when you say over-enriched, talk to me about, well, actually, let's step back. If I was going to say, tell me what healthy soil is, what would you say?
Healthy soil performs the functions of the land manager's desire.
Oh, so it depends what healthy soil is.
It's in the eye of the beholder, right? It's not good or bad until we want it to do something or not. Just kind of like a weed is just a plant out of place. The dandelion's fine until you don't want it in the crack in your driveway
Right.
or pockmarking your lawn or whatever. So, serpentine soils, like they basically don't grow plants except for a couple of specialists. They're fairly toxic because of a lot of heavy metals. It's okay. I mean, it's not a healthy soil for a garden, but it's a healthy soil for the natural park that it resides within.
All right. Well, let me reframe my question then, Mr. Researcher. If I had a garden bed that I wanted to grow vegetables in, what might healthy soil look like underneath that?
So you would probably, want like a loamy texture, I don't know, around 5% organic matter and sufficient levels of the rest of the fertilizers like NPK or your micronutrients. It would depend on what your crop, but for most vegetable gardens, you're looking slightly acidic, relatively elevated nitrogen and phosphorus, and even sometimes, potassium levels compared to native soils. Just in general, you do want a richer soil than you probably will find in the native environment for your garden.
So when you say 5% organic matter, here in the desert, we have less than 1%. What else is there that goes into this soil?
When we're talking soil texture, like if you want a loamy soil that's composed of it's just a physical property, a physical characteristic. So that would be sand, silt, and clay. They're really just size classifications for particles. Anything less than 2 millimeters in diameter is a soil particle. It doesn't matter if it's a 2 millimeter piece of glass or a 2 millimeter piece of basalt. It doesn't matter. As soon as it gets that small, it's sand or something else. And so that's usually that's most of what everything is. If you've got 5% organic matter, then it's 95% mineral element. If you've got 1% organic matter, then it's 99% mineral element.
So that mineral is clay, sand,
and silt.
And
Yeah,
silt.
just really, really weathered rock. Really, really, really tiny, fine bits of the planet.
Cool. All right. Good. So in doing your investigation, what were your findings?
Over-enriched, and we can talk about what that might mean.
Sure.
But in general, what we're seeing is there's published guidelines for how much fertility you generally need for, especially when you're talking vegetable garden, like it's a fairly standardized list of like, you can look into corn needs, X to Y, whereas beets need between A and B, or it varies a bit, but in general, you can find recommendations for how much nitrogen parts per million and phosphorus in parts per million, and for all those central elements needed for plant growth. And really, what I was just finding was that hardly any of the sites I investigated were even within that range. Basically, everyone was at the top end or beyond. Like one example I could show is, again, with the organic matter, you typically see about 3 to 6% as the goal that most farmers kind of manage towards.
Mm-hmm.
My sites average 13%.
Hold on, hold on. Average.
My average was twice the
Wow.
upper end of the recommended range. And I had one site which was a full 33%. 1/3 of the soil was organic matter. How it happened is this person told me they just built this raised bed shortly before I arrived to test it. It was about 3-ish feet deep, and it was filled with, quote, just compost. So those plants burned. They did not live. Fresh pepper plants planted in before my research was complete that summer, before my data gathering was complete, those plants had died. And so that's one of those dangers of too much, right? It's not that often, like a single instance of 33% organic matter. No one else is that close, and most people won't be. But it's one of the things that can happen. Like your plants can be stunted or even killed from too much of certain kinds of elements.
Now, I know that too much woody matter in soil robs the nitrogen from the plants and they'll suffer. Is that what you're talking about?
No. So too much carbon in the soil really just ties up that nitrogen within the microbial community, and so it starves out the plants.
Right.
In this case, the burning, so much compost, there's a chance it wasn't finished composting and it burned due to temperature. There's also a pretty strong chance that it burns chemically, just a lot of nitric acid leaching out of this very, very rich amendment.
In an attempt not to get too much organic matter in a bed, let's say I have somebody with a 4 by 8 foot raised bed and they want to fill it with something to start growing groceries. Where would they start?
If you can, I recommend just fill dirt for the most part. Like kind of going back to how you'd said before, some kind of, natively, locally sourced dirt. Not necessarily that it may or may not be microbially better. It's just going to be cheap. Most of this, we just need to fill the space. As we were talking about with what's the rest of the soil, most of it's mineral content. Most of it is small, tiny little pieces of rock. Most of it is still, relatively speaking, inert. And it's not actually doing much. It's aiding physical processes. It's rooting your plant. It's just, helping it not be blown away by the wind, and it's allowing for water to stay in the root zone and to slowly drain and to keep a balance between oxygen and water in the soil pores. But ultimately, your plants aren't like eating the soil, Sorry, but you wanted to know what to put into it. So I would just say put in whatever the cheapest kind of dirt that you can find that is clean. Be careful that it's not from some contaminated site or it has a bunch of heavy metals or something like that. But if you can get some clean or some dirt that you kind of trust that someone just kind of dug out from somewhere else, like if they're excavating a basement and you feel like maybe it's safe, I do recommend a heavy metal test. But just some fill dirt would, I think, be most of what you need. And then soil test it afterwards, see what you actually need to supply to it.
Wow.
And then supply those nutrients, right? Like save your time and your money and your effort and the environment and just give it what it needs. Again, back to that barrel. If it's deficient in nitrogen, probably, then you need to give it some nitrogen. But if it's sufficient in phosphorus, then why add the phosphorus? That's, an expense that you need not endure.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, so this is going to shift a lot of the people's thinking that I've been telling for years to add lots of organic matter in your raised bed garden. In fact, one of the things that I've coached people do, and we've had luck with this down here in Arizona, is fill up a raised bed garden, or halfway fill a raised bed garden with woody mulch, and then put your soil on top of it, and you get the fungal growth going on underneath. Any thoughts on that?
Are you putting soil on top or are you putting compost on top?
So compost is something that has been fully composted. I don't recommend that people use straight compost. A lot of the products that we use here are for our garden beds are a mixture of compost, perlite, cocoa peat.
Yeah, bagged media.
Bagged media. Yeah.
Honestly, like sounding soil-less, really, unless they mix in some sand for some cheap weight. Which they do. We can go off that tangent too.
No, I know. Yeah.
Urban soils are basically sand, because it's so cheap and nobody holds them accountable for it.
Exactly. That's what I tell people. I say, you have plenty of dirt where you're at. Don't buy dirt.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, especially so again in your instance down there with a very depleted, I guess we could say, or very low organic matter content soil. you really can benefit from this kind of carbon injection, like
Mm-hmm.
a large amount of organic matter itself. I mean, because really, if we're saying organic matter, it's just anything with carbon, right?
Right.
So, but as you just pointed out a second ago, there's better definitions still. Like we've got actual compost versus this soilless media. I don't know. They're different things, and that's part of what kind of makes it so complicated.
Right.
I think, I mean, if you're saying you're meeting success, and I think it sounds like a really good answer for your area. You're getting that giant layer of carbon that's going to slowly work in. You have a soilless media layer above, or sorry, a soilless layer above,
Mm-hmm.
and that soilless layer, you're basically kind of making a large potted environment, if you will.
Yeah.
And by the time the soilless media compacts and the wood chips have been, incorporated in the soil below, you finally have like some rich native soil down below.
Right.
And your synthetic kind of pseudo potted environment is gone, and you're actually back to growing in soil. Just remediated soil rather than what's right outside of the edge of your bed, which is just that dusty sand, less than 1% anything. Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah. Wow. Cool. All right. Well, thank you for all of that.
Yeah. No problem.
In your bio, I want to touch on one thing real quick. In your bio, you talked about insect protein production. Let's just talk about that for a couple of minutes, because I've interviewed multiple people, including Jeffrey Tomberlin, about insects and the protein involved, and it's a fascination of mine that I wish I had more life in me, because I'd go start a black soldier fly processing plant to process food wastes. So give me 2 minutes worth on that.
Okay, 2 minutes on insect protein production. First, it's important. We need protein. There's more people than ever. They are getting richer despite this vast economic disparity. People are, on average, getting a little bit richer. Standards of living are increasing. We want more meat as a species. We're trying to eat more meat. Really, we're just ultimately needing more protein simply because we have more people.
Right.
That protein right now is coming from two sources mostly: fish meal, which is killing the ocean, and soy meal, which is killing the land. Insect meal offers this almost unbelievable solution to turn food waste back into high quality protein and fat to then be fed to our current livestock systems, or if people ever get over themselves, we could eat the bugs directly.
I've tried to wrap my head around that one and haven't quite gotten there yet.
Yeah.
So this fish protein and soy protein, it's used for animal feed?
Yes, it's just like you and I need protein to build our bodies. These livestock that we're growing whatever livestock and just anything alive needs protein. Plants need protein. Proteins are the building blocks of our life, right? Which are proteins themselves. They are made of amino acids, which is ultimately made of, in some part, nitrogen, but in large part, phosphorus. And so we're getting back to another way where we could save this planet. One day or another, we are going to see the end of cheap phosphorus. We keep finding bigger phosphorus deposits around the globe, and then we keep heralding the end, and then we find a bigger deposit. That's great, like cheap phosphorus, that's great. It's making food cheap. That will end. Probably not in my lifetime, but it's going to end, and eventually we're going to need to reclaim phosphorus from the ocean, and that's going to be expensive. So these bugs offer a chance to kind of close this cycle and stop flushing our waste into the ocean, where we're eventually going to have to recover it to grow food again, and instead close that cycle and get that phosphorus, get the protein, get the fats. I mean, get really everything. I mean, all of it's important, but we're just closing the cycle. We eat the food, we create food waste, we create waste itself. All of this can be eaten by these bugs. They can themselves be eaten by whatever we eat.
And what kind of bugs are you talking about?
I favor black soldier flies. There are others. A lot of people have looked into mealworms. I mean, there's a handful of crickets have kind of hit the market.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's I like black soldier fly larvae. I think they are the best for a wide scale or industrial scale application, which is what we need. This is not, we don't need, not to say anybody shouldn't have a little black soldier fly bin in their yard, but that's not what we need. We need giant processing centers to handle the waste produced by what are going to be mega cities in the very near future. So I think these black soldier fly larvae are the processing part of the life cycle, but the black soldier fly is the whole species.
If you want to know more information about black soldier fly processing plants, I did interview Jeffrey Tomberlin on the Urban Farm Podcast, episode 313. Go listen to that episode. It was amazing. So what other kind of bugs are we talking about?
So, yeah, I mean, I think mealworms and crickets are kind of the biggest ones. Some people are exploring some others.
I have one for you.
Yeah, what?
35 years ago in the 70s, I discovered something. They're commonly known as fairy shrimp. Anostraca is their scientific name, and Anostraca. They're the sea monkeys. Remember the sea monkeys? Brine shrimp?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yep.
So I actually played in the 70s. I played with raising some of them. The nice thing about fairy shrimp, brine shrimp are, probably a 1/4 inch long, maybe a 1/2 centimeter. And the fairy shrimp or Anostraca, they can get up to be 1.5 inches long. And they grow in temporal pools in the desert here. They're really fascinating.
Yeah, I pulled up their wiki page. Yeah. I mean, I think going smaller is the answer. I mean, personally, I favor black soldier flies for a number of reasons over these other species, but I think going small is the answer. Insects are going to be one thing, but really, insects are just going to be a stepping stone to the next, where we're just harnessing bacteria to produce the nutrients we need.
Yeah.
Like, we already do it a little bit for things like insulin. We can do it way more than that. Just, again, if people can get there themselves.
Right. Wrap their head around it. Well, and when you have a powder that looks like flour, whether it's bug powder or flour from, wheat, it's kind of all looks the same, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's kind of like the president for Beyond Meat talks about people don't eat they don't eat burgers because it comes from an animal. They eat it despite the fact that it comes from an animal. Really, we just want good tasting food. You make it taste good, people will eat it. And so I'm excited. The legislation is still kind of coming along, but we're really starting to see an opening up in this marketplace to where it might start hitting more products and start hopefully replacing some of these other uses that we have, like fish meal.
Wow. Well, this has been really fascinating. Thank you so much for all your great data.
Yeah, it's been fun. I hope it's been helpful.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Oh, okay. So now the heavier stuff, huh?
Yeah.
Life.
Right?
I think I've kind of had a real failure to appreciate what I've got till it's gone, right? Just like in that song. Always kind of trying to change and move on to something and keep things going. I guess it's been a problem where, like, when I thought of losing something, it was too easy to kind of focus on the fact that, well, change is coming, circumstances are going to be different. I'm okay with change. I'm okay with different. But I was overlooking the loss for what it was, for what it used to be. And so I think just kind of slowing down and seeing what you've got and like critically examining what it is to miss that thing rather than to simply have something else in its place.
Wow, cool. And your biggest success?
I think finding this field.
Oh, yes.
Really, like, potentially I can exercise a holistic life in this field. My work feels meaningful, even if it's not always pleasurable. I like doing this stuff. I like talking about it. I like researching it. I mean, it's, on one hand, you need a good work-life balance, right? But on the other hand, without letting it consume me, it is many aspects of my life, and it's not a bad thing.
Well, and I love what you said, meaningful, if not always pleasurable. That's, I run along an edge with that because what I do consumes my life. It is my entire life, 24/7, every day. And it's always been that way for me since the 1970s. And, it's sometimes we have to stand back and reevaluate. But for me, sometimes it's a blessing to have known for this long that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And sometimes it's a curse.
Yeah, there's no escaping it.
Right.
But you're building something big. It's a little bit self-fulfilling kind of in light of this big success. When to be lucky enough to have found a groove that fits so well, how can I not run down it? Like, it's more like, don't go breakneck. Like, you need to keep some breaks, like trying to maintain some awareness. This is amazing, but be controlled. Why I'm doing it, I don't know. Nothing else seems really worth it.
I love that. Love that. I kind of had a sense before we started talking that we were going to correlate a lot in our lives, and you're right. It is so worth it. It's like, this is what we're supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah. Like you keep self-examining and cutting away, and there's not a lot left beyond keep yourself and those around you fed. Right.
Yeah.
And just, really, the only thing to change by that point is to slowly work on increasing who you're considering when you think about those who are around you.
Now, I'm really excited about this next question. If you could recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be and why?
This is the one that took the most time. When you sent me these questions, the other ones were like, oh, okay, yeah, talk about these things, sure. And the book was like, how do you give someone one book? Because as soon as you start talking about a book, you get on to other books.
Right.
But I feel like, especially with the topic of your podcast, you got plenty of farming kind of investigations. Like, if I were to recommend like The Lean Farm, everyone's already read it, or at least they should. So why recommend that one?
It was a great book, by the way, and I interviewed him.
Yes. For me, I ended on one by Murray Bookchin. It's titled Social Anarchism or Lifestyle Anarchism, An Unbridgeable Chasm. I read it in a point in my life where, it turned out I really needed it. It refined like this vague opinion of dissent that I had into one that really began to appreciate this mutual condition we share as humans. It changed my idea of what kind of future I was trying to build. I think this might really be relevant for some of your listeners out there, because it shifted me from dreaming of like this self-sufficient, unplugged, off-grid homestead where I lived a small, contented life within a perfected bubble. And now I'm dreaming of these social connections, because if I were to be this change that I want to see in the world, I don't want to see a world of hermits in their cabins.
Right.
I had to pick up this book again when I finally settled on it. And I pulled out this quote that Bookchin himself uses. Individuality is impaired when each person decides to fend for themselves. The absolutely isolated individual has always been an illusion. The fully developed individual is the consummation of a fully developed society. So that book, it's short, and if you can really read it, it might change your life.
Wow. Name and author again?
That was Murray Bookchin. Oh, and the title was Social Anarchism or Lifestyle Anarchism, An Unbridgeable Chasm.
Wow, cool. And what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
I always think of this magnet that I saw on a fridge while I was doing my soil analyses for this research. It said something to the extent of, the biggest lie I tell myself, I'll remember, I don't have to write it down. So my advice is write things down. It not only helps you to remember, because that in and of itself is valuable, especially as you continue to age, but writing it down pushes you forward. You have to write these things down to get it out of your mind and into the world. Like, it saves your place. It ratchets your progress. A garden doesn't ever start by you just walking onto the lawn, or at least not a good garden. It starts, like any other real change. It starts with a plan. You gotta take hold of your future as best you can, and then shape it how you want, because you're not going to win all the time or even most of the time. But if you're passively receiving things, you're really limiting yourself. And so write things down, make a plan, find a way to make that plan happen. And if it doesn't work, then write that down so that you can adapt to it, because you need to move forward. You've got to do something. You've got to be active, because you're not going to make it if you just are sitting here getting pushed around.
There you go. Wow. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Mykl.
Thanks for having me. I really had fun.
And how can our listeners get a hold of you?
I think the easiest, I have a personal website, which is a little rough, but it's myklnelson.com, myklnelson.com. That's kind of where I put my links to everything. So whatever I actually have going on should be there. Like, I've got some things in development right now that should be live by the time this podcast airs.
Perfect.
So myklnelson.com, that'll be it. Otherwise, right now I work at Oregon State, so you can find my profile there in the horticulture department. You mentioned the Garden Ecology Lab blog that I sometimes publish to from Oregon State. And then my email's available at a couple different places. And I've got limited social media. Like, I'm on LinkedIn and ResearchGate if they want to find me there.
Perfect. You can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/Mykl. That's MYKL.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.